And that's what's happening. So you don't really need to see this because you can see that by this time, you know, you've got a reasonably efficient on cycle 3. And so there's 3 out of the possible 4 outcomes are exactly what you want. So the detection process itself, cyber green, after the melting's occurred, the cyber green protein is free in the reaction, and it does have a very weak fluorescence. So when the primers bind and start to form the double-stranded, as I said, the cyber green can intercalate with this double-stranded part, and as it extends, more of the cyber green will intercalate. And when it intercalates, you can see I've actually indicated a darker colour here, and that indicates that the level of fluorescence increases, intensifies. So it's the difference in fluorescence that will be measured from that low key fluorescence when it's not bound to the much higher, much intense fluorescence. And the onboard computer makes it directly proportional to the amount of double-stranded DNA. The other method is it's a probe method, and I want to show you a couple of probes. The original probes that we used were called molecular beacons. They're not so often used now, but it's quite interesting to see the difference. You can still buy them, but they're not as popular. Okay, so how these were constructed. There was a fluorescence at one end, and at the other end there was an entity which could quench the fluorescence. So if those two came into close contact, the fluorescence would be quenched. And near the ends is sequence which is complementary to each other. So maybe 3 or 4 bases here and 3 or 4 bases here that were complementary. So i.e. if they came into contact, they would anneal. Like that. And at the correct annealing temperature, this is exactly what would happen. And in that form, it would be inactive. So you have an inactive form and an active form, which is all controllable by varying the temperature. So in the actual scenario of the PCR, the DNA is melted, and at the same time that increase in heat causes the inactive probe to release and become active, and in its active form it can obviously anneal. As the temperature comes down to the annealing temperature, it can obviously anneal to its target and fluoresce. So the only thing that needed to be taken into consideration was that when the next cycle started and the primers located and extension was going to occur, this had to get out of the way. So it had to have a melting temperature, or a release temperature in this case, I guess, but melting away from the other strand 7 to 10 degrees higher than the annealing temperature. Otherwise, it would stall the whole thing. It was quite often difficult for that to happen, and there tended to be fairly inefficient processes going on. One of the reasons why it's been superseded quite largely. So the one that you hear of most common, there are others actually, but this is the most common one and the one that we tend to use here almost exclusively when we're using probes, is the TAC-mount fluorogenic probe, or TAC-mount probe. And it looks very similar. You can see straight away there that it is actually much shorter. I haven't done that accidentally, it purposely is a much shorter sequence. So in this form, the fluorescent part of it and the quench part of it are close enough proximity when it's in this format to actually quench this. So this is actually quenching this as when they're in that constructing state there. Okay, so when you buy them, they're quenched. So they will bind or anneal to the target sequence on a melted double-stranded DNA. When the primers anneal at a slightly different temperature, they begin to extend. When they reach the probe, they continue. The probe has such a weak attachment that at this point it breaks away and releases the fluorophore, the fluorescent part, which moves away from the quencher, and it then starts to fluoresce. Further away it moves, it begins to fluoresce. So that's how that works, and that process means that double-stranded needs to be formed to actually break this away, but it's not actually attaching to anything. But you get more of it, the more double-stranded you get. So it's, again, directly proportional. Okay, setting up a real-time PCR is very much like setting up a conventional PCR in so much that the reagents that go in are essentially the same. The main difference is that these ingredients in a conventional PCR can be put in either as a master mix or separately or whatever. They're invariably put in, or most of them, as a master mix with real time. So you buy it in as a master mix already made up. So the master mixes is a bit tedious because they're very similar, but just to let you know what's in them, not to put them all up. Okay. So you can see that the only difference between these two really is that one has cybergreen in and the other has the specific probe in and not cybergreen in. The other ingredients are very similar. This is the bit you buy as a master mix. 2 times cybergreen contains the DNA pol as well. The DNA pol is inactive, and it will only be activated at high temperatures, so 97 degrees or above. That's not strictly speaking true. You can, if you put it in at 94 degrees, what will happen is it will take about 10 minutes or so to activate. So the first dozen cycles or so will have gone by before it's become fully active. So that will not be very efficient. You can do that. People, if they forget to activate it first or don't set their PCR up properly, still get a result, but it's not as good. So these should be actually activated at 97 degrees. It makes them really stable when they're not in use. So when they're brought in, they can often sit around in -20 conditions for long periods and no real damage to them. So the next point on the same original slide, the next difference next to the fact that they're supplied as a master mix, the reactions are almost always set up in a microtetra format. They don't have to be 96 well. We pretty much do use 96 well here all the time. But you can buy in plates that will take 384 and various other formats as well. There's Eppendorf do a circular one that rotates. So, but the 96 well is the most common probably. And these probes and dyes can also be bought in that are already in the plates set up. It's important to remember though that the actual product that you're going to get tends to be much, much shorter in real time because you don't have to have all that bother about including or excluding introns, and also the problems of visualization on a gel, which you would have if you were using very short, or you were obtaining very short products. The shorter product will always be more efficient because it doesn't take very much to make. The longer they are, there's quite often points at which the process actually stops and the polymerase will just drop off for some unknown reasons. So it's less efficient. So most of them, in fact, are in this region, 16 perhaps to 75 or 80 bases, but they can go up to about 200 base pairs. Okay, and someone setting up a real time, I don't know why I put that picture in, but it's a nice picture. You can actually